I'd now finally like to turn to inheritance, because this is a subject which is often neglected. What is inheritance? Well, inheritance is the transmission of rights in property. And of course we all think we know what property is. We all tend to think in our own way about property being an object. This watch, for example, or this Naga figure here being property. In fact, anthropologists and economists and others regard property not as the object, but the relationship you have with an object. It is not this Naga figure that is my property. My property is a right I have to destroy, give away, sell, or otherwise this Naga figure. And therefore you can have property in all sorts of things, what lawyers often call incorporeal property, that is rights in things which don't have any actual body, a right in the presentation to a living, as a Cambridge College might have, or rights in some societies to songs, to dreams, to secret spells, to all sorts of things. Now these rights in property are transmitted in various ways and at various times. Usually they occur at particular times. They occur in certain phases of the life cycle. In most societies, property is transmitted late on. Often it's transmitted actually at death or at marriage. And therefore, in peasant societies, for instance, often parents retain great control over property and only transmit it at the last minute to their children, and this keeps their children in check. Sometimes it's tied to marriage, and therefore marriages cannot occur without the transmission of property to children through dowry and other mechanisms which I'll describe. One of the characteristic features of the transformation of societies from basically landed agricultural societies to industrial ones is that property now is much more diffused, and the transmission, since most property now doesn't actually flow through individual families, much of it flows through the state. Children are much less dependent than they were, except in possibly the top 0.5% of society, much less dependent on their parents' own transmission of property. We receive all the important things, or many of the important things, like health, care, policing, education, and even housing and access to jobs, not through our parents' efforts and what is transmitted to us at death by our parents, but earlier on in our lives through the welfare state and other institutions like that. So it doesn't really matter so much, but in most societies, the actual point at which property is transmitted has been very important. It occurs through these various channels I mentioned, through education, through dowry, and through inheritance in the technical sense of someone actually giving you money or stock. To whom does it go? Well, the major distinction anthropologists make is between property which goes downwards. In our society we have for many centuries had the idea that property flows down. It must flow down from parents to children and to grandchildren. It cannot ascend, and it tends to go down from generation to generation. Jack Goody and others have pointed out that in Africa the main flow of property goes sideways, what you call lateral inheritance rather than vertical inheritance. If you die, it'll go to your brother and to all the other siblings until that generation is exhausted, and then it will go to the next generation. Finally, there is the particular way in which property is divided, whether it's held to be a right of all the children or whether it's just to one or two of them. And our own system again has been peculiar in having a very strong emphasis on impartible inheritance. That's to say, it's not divided, and it tended to go to the eldest male son, primogeniture. Most societies conceive of property being that property of the family as a whole, and therefore all the sons equally, and probably all the daughters, have an equal share. You cannot be disinherited from your property, since at birth you are born into it, whereas in our system you can be disinherited, tended to have an impartible and disinheritable system, whereas other societies have divisibility and an automatic right. In the next talk, I want to move on from descent to marriage.